Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place where we can have great conversations about tech with some great people. And I got my coffee and I'm ready. So today I'm really excited. We were talking for 30 minutes before, and I just can't wait. So let's go ahead. My friend is Christos Matskas. Christos, you want to say hello?
Hey,
Introduce
hi
yourself?
everyone. How are you? Thanks for inviting me, Isaac.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Christos, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I work for Microsoft. I'm a program manager at Microsoft, but in general, I'm a geek and a
Yeah.
fitness fanatic, and I love programming. That's what I love to do, and most of the time, I try to solve problems for other developers. And these days, I focus on security and help them write more secure software.
Interesting. Um, Security doesn't come up ever, right? Like,
Nope.
no, not ever.
It's
Like, I
it's it's
mean,
an afterthought. It's like
yeah.
performance and security. Let's push the software out there and then we can solve them. But
And
as I say, it's usually the two things that you need to be aware before you even start coding a solution.
and and security never comes up. Like it definitely hasn't came up like in the last week at all.
Never in the news. Like we never
No.
make the news. It's I know it's horrible that like I've been in this industry for almost 20 years now, and certain things tend to repeat themselves. Like
Yeah.
if you look at the OWASP top 10, if you've never done that, I would urge you to look at OWASP top 10. You'll still see SQL injection as the top one um, risk for most of the apps out there, which is scary. The fact that we know about this and we've known this for the 14 years that I've been
Yeah.
following OWASP, and it's still the number one. It's sad, but there are too many developers out there and too many solutions, and every solution is different. Therefore, every security implementation is different.
Yeah, I remember I was in college and like I think there was we had took an e-commerce class, and like part of that class was like basically writing secure websites, which I mean like in the early 2000s, like who wrote
Hmm.
secure websites. But I think one of the things was interesting is like we wrote like a demo like on how to like on what SQL injection can do, and like we literally did like in a text box like a drop table command, and like it
Yeah.
dropped the table, right? And I thought at that point in time I was like, man, this web stuff, like I don't know what I'm getting into. This is crazy. Like you can delete databases from a text box.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is how people got started in tech, and I would
Hmm.
love to hear from you. What were the things that got you interested in tech? Did you have a computer growing up? Did you just jump right into like tech computer things in university? Like I'd love to know like what's Christos' origin story.
I am a late bloomer. So early on, I wanted to be an interpreter, right? I grew
Okay.
up in Europe, and my first language is Greek, and I learned French and English as I was growing up, and I was pretty good with languages, and I thought to myself, maybe I can use that to, become an interpreter. And the European Union was big at that time, especially around the 90s, where they were actually setting up the whole European Union, and you need to have translators, you need people to translate stuff. But at some point, I figured out that computers were going to be intelligent enough to do translation on the fly. And you've probably seen it. Skype can now translate between multiple languages, and it does it on the fly. So I almost foresaw that my job would be obsolete in a few years because computers can do that. Like written text translation is extremely easy to do these days. Google Translate is amazing in doing that. Bing Translate does the same. So I said to myself, I was about 19, 20 years old. I was already working, doing random stuff. And I thought to myself, what do I want to do? Like if I had to make a choice right now, what would I be passionate about? And what would I like to do? And I thought I want to be a hacker. That was literally my thinking. I was like, I want to be a hiker, a good hiker, the good guy, not the black hat hiker. I wanted to be a white hat hiker and protect the world,
Sure.
but I had no idea how to do it. So I was like, you know what? I need to learn how to program first, because obviously as a hiker, I need to understand how to decode things. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna do a degree in software engineering, and
Okay.
that I decided to do. So I went to the UK. I did my first degree, and then as I was doing my course, I also realized that I need to understand networking, like how things are put together, how they communicate, and how they do things. And therefore, I did a master's degree in computer networking. It's all about TCP/IP and stacks
Sure.
and Cisco routing and all these. And then as I was doing the course, I also realized that getting a job as a security network engineer was going to be fairly hard because
Sure.
everything is very centralized. So I was studying in Scotland, and I already saw that most of the companies were remotely configuring and accessing networking equipment in central offices like London and the US. So I was like, it's not going to work out. So I went back into programming, and in 2005, I got my first job. I was 24, 25. So as I said, late bloomer. The first time I actually had a computer that did programming was in university. In fact, I didn't even know how to send an email before I joined university. So I was a beginner at university. I didn't have, 10,000 hours worth of hacking and programming on my
Sure.
own. The only thing I did before university was a touch typing course. If you've never done it, I would highly recommend you do it because it makes you a lot more efficient for typing. And I was able to touch type in both Greek and English, so I never look at my keyboard when I type stuff, which was great. And that got me a little bit into the right direction as I was preparing for things. But university was the actual first experience where I spent a lot of time in front of the computer.
Sure.
And I remember I started questioning my life choices probably about 2 or 3 weeks into the course because the first language that we started with was C. C.
Yeah.
That's what the university decided to break new students with the C language, which I don't know if you've ever done any programming with C. It's probably not the most intuitive and easy language to work with, and it really escalates fast, right? So you start with C in, C out to do some simple input output, and then suddenly you're dropped into pointers and memory allocations
Yep.
and all that stuff. So like, oh my God, what am I doing here? These 10 lines of code make no sense.
Yep.
But I had good lecturers and good program coordinators, and they did say to me, like, stick with it. Things will start falling into place eventually and will make sense to you. So please don't give up so early on. And I'm glad I didn't. So there we are, 20 years later.
Yeah, I have a little rant on computer science curriculums that's like, what is what is the value in like making the most difficult problems to solve like
Hmm.
at early at entry level people? Like
Yeah.
it should go the opposite way where it literally you start like, writing code in Scratch or writing
Yeah.
code in like some text-based environment, and then you go layers and layers and layers down. That's not the goal of computer science curriculums, in my opinion. I've been very open about this.
Yeah.
But I think in general, like we want people to come into the industry because there are lots of developer jobs out there, and I don't think we do ourselves any justice by, or do ourselves any favors by making that like first program so hard, right?
Yeah.
To understand.
Yeah, a lot of universities have, a lot of reputable universities have started lowering the entry barrier, like using JavaScript, for example, as the first
Yep.
language because it's so universally acceptable. It runs everywhere. It doesn't require specific hardware to make it run. And I have to agree that you're right. I mean, universities are really playing a catch-up game with the industry where they're not fast enough in addressing the
Yeah.
needs of the industry, right? We don't teach testing. We don't teach source control. We don't teach. At least when I took my course, I
Yeah.
don't. I think there was source control, but we never really got taught about that. We never really did QA testing and actual testing and why should software be written in certain ways. We definitely did not talk about security. I'll tell you that. Let alone all the other things like performance. But hopefully we can, as the industry, we can put some pressure. Like I started working with a few universities in Scotland before I left Scotland to help them make the curriculum more modern as an advisor. But they definitely need more people from the industry to advise them on how to shape the curriculum to make it more relevant to our current needs.
I mean, that's a very spot on thing that you said is that slow moving, right? I think
Hmm.
also like the goals of a computer science curriculum, at least from my experience, I didn't major in computer science. I took some computer science classes and eventually graduated with a different degree. Um, it's definitely a funnel into academia, though.
Hmm.
Like you're talking about these concepts that are so abstract from like the job of most software developers,
Yeah.
right? If
Yeah.
you're a developer, I've jokingly said this a million times, like you're solving the same problem in 18 million different ways, right? There's
Yeah.
some data source and you want to be able to have some interface over this data source.
Yeah.
And there's been, hundreds of technologies that have been created to do just that for you instead of having to build it. And, good, bad, or indifferent, they get, people use them, then people move away from them and go back to, writing actual programs. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, how do I get this data that's important to my business available to my customers or to my internal users so people can be more effective at their job?
Yeah.
And that's a real, that's just a wide stroke because there's lots of companies that are doing crazy things in tech. But for the most part, like you work for a bank or you work for an insurance company or you work for an airline or whatever, it's all about trying to make data show up in effective ways.
Yes.
And a lot of teaching, unless you go to like a code camp, which is specifically that, a lot of teaching is like, let's talk about big O notation, and let's talk about logarithmic, let's talk about all these computer science concepts and algorithms that literally like people have already solved.
Yes.
So I jokingly I told somebody one time, like, when was the last time you had to write a bubble sort and your job was dependent on it?
Or a linked list. When was the last time you had to traverse a linked list or a binary tree? It's like,
And your job was dependent on your boss is like, I very much need you to write this linked list that does this, and you're like, I don't know, okay.
well, there are there are very specific jobs.
Yes.
Like if you're writing a compiler, or if you're building an operating system that needs to do X things, or if you're creating embedded systems, then probably that's where you need to know these kind of things. But I agree with you. Knowing what they are, logarithmic complexity and O notation, is good to know what it is and what it means. Also knowing what data structures are and what is the most efficient way to store certain things, yes.
Yep.
But you and me will probably agree that 90% of the developers out there are going to load something into a collection. They will iterate through that collection and then dump the data somewhere. Maybe filter or do things. Most of the underlying languages that you're using will have built-in solutions for sorting and filtering and do that, so you don't have to re-implement or reinvent the wheel. So it all comes down to how well you can architect a solution to benefit of all these Lego pieces you have out there to make it work. And we don't really do a good job in doing that because we focus on the individual components rather than the end-to-end solution.
Yep.
And we do a bad job as an industry as well in general, presenting end-to-end solutions because we always focus on the one thing that we're interested at that point. So, yeah.
Like tech is very much like a product-based industry, right? I get it. I mean, every industry is a product-based industry, but like tech, at least from my experience, is like, okay, here's this cool product. That product can be like a combination of hundreds of products into a larger brand or product. But it's like, look at this product. And as a developer, the question is, okay, how can I use this product to solve my business needs? Well, let me tell you about that. And then it's, sales cycles and all this stuff, right? And that's how the machine works, and that's fine. But I think we can do ourselves we can cause a lot of hardships on ourselves by making things way too product oriented. But that's a rant for a different day.
We don't have enough time today to.
No, I mean, we only got an hour and like we're already X into it and we're struggling, complaining. But yeah, so like I would say, at least for you, you're probably, I wouldn't say different, but you have a different probably view into things because you started off more on the networking side, the hardware side, whatever, right? And then you moved subtly into software. Where else I think there's this huge thing in the middle between, what you call a developer and what you call like, I don't even know if it's still a term that people use, like the IT pro. Like the person whose job is to administrate systems or to manage systems or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And there's hardly very much overlap unless you work at a small company and you're responsible for kind of doing everything. Yeah. So I guess my question to you is like making that jump from more hardware / administration focused work to, I guess, with development or custom engineering work. What was that experience like? Other than it being painful because you were being asked to like do a bunch of stuff in C, which nobody should have to do unless they really, really want to. What was that experience like?
So I was lucky. The first job I got was going back into software, and I was working for a manufacturing company that prints labels for bottles and
Yeah,
all the other products that you see out there. And I was managing the, no managing, I was part of the IT team that was building the software to manage the end-to-end process from invoicing and sales to printing out labels and scanning barcodes to track the process.
sure.
And we were migrating from, brace yourselves, from an MS Access
Yep.
system into a modern .NET solution. Modern?
Sure.
It was .NET 1
Modern.
back then.
Yep.
But it was great rewriting everything and understanding how the system is put together. And I learned a lot on the job. I made a ton of mistakes. It was scary thinking back how many things we did and how we did things because
Sure.
there was a salesperson that knew a little bit of IT and access, and he was brought in to run the team because the main developer left for a better job. So he had a
Sure.
salesperson that doesn't really know about IT practices to doing that, teaching me that was fresh out of college to try to build software. So mistakes were made. Uh,
Sure.
let's say running SQL commands on the production server is not a good idea, but we'll skip through that. Anyway, and then I got a job somewhere else, better money, bigger company, working in fintech, and I was lucky because this company was doing everything again from large data ingestion to data manipulation to presenting the data into a web solution. And there I joined as an IT person. So I went from developer into IT and
Yeah.
managing servers and making sure that, and I realized that even though I was in IT, I was writing PowerShell scripts and I was creating scripts that we had to, automate the key rotation or the passwords or whatever every month. So I was still touching code a little bit and I missed it. I was like, man, I really want to go back into development. So I actually went to the manager, the dev manager. I said, I want to switch from being your IT person to doing some development. And I went through an informal internal, um, you know, interview process where I was asked certain questions just to show my chops, and I joined as a junior developer again, which was
Yeah.
great. I was very lucky to work with some really competent and clever developers, and they were mentors to me. So they did help me get up to speed very quickly. And then after a few years, I moved into consultancy. I would say it adds value to know both because at
Yeah.
some point as well, we did have a lot of SQL dependencies. So we had a lot of SQL servers that were doing a lot of heavy data management and lifting. And we only had one DBA. And my manager said, do you want to be the shadow DBA? So when Brian goes on holiday, you can take over. And I was like, yeah, I would love to do that. So understanding how data works, understanding how machines work, and understanding how developers can benefit from that, it's always great because it helps you think about how to write more efficient code. Do I need a, a, a string max on a SQL field when I can actually have it at 32 character and then allocate the appropriate space on the disk and what have you.
Sure.
So things like that, and it was great working in there. I would say IT Pro is great, but at some point it didn't really sit well with me,
Yeah.
so I wanted to go back into development, and this is where my passion was.
Yeah, there's something to say about like a technology generalist, right?
Hmm.
Like, and these people exist all over the industry because a lot of companies. I think your example of like they work you know tech isn't the core competency of that business. The
Hmm.
core competency of that business is printing labels,
Yep.
but they needed software to be able to do their job more effectively, right? And they're not going to have a development team of 100, 200 people. They're probably a development team of less than 10, right?
Two.
Or less than
Yep.
5 or 2. So you have this situation where you're given the opportunity to do a lot
Yes.
across all of tech, which I think gives you a lot of visibility and awareness as to like what good software looks like. Obviously, what bad software looks like
Oh
too.
yeah. Yeah.
But there's something to say, especially because I was in a similar boat in my career where I did like database management and I did, web server management and stuff like that. Like, not, I didn't go deep into those skills, but I know enough to, if like something is on fire, I'm like, oh, okay, I can probably figure out how to resolve this situation.
Yes.
And I think that's helped me in my career have a bit of clarity in like how challenging some things actually are.
Hmm.
Because I think in general, developers just think, oh, like that's just this, that's easy, but it's not really.
No.
And I think one thing that's also interesting, you and I have somewhat similar career paths that we did consultant work and then we switched over to a completely different
Field.
different field or different way of thinking completely right into
Yeah.
marketing. And then now you went back into product, which is another step that I haven't taken. But I'm curious to know. It's like I had this conversation a couple of days ago where it's like we're all trying to say the same problem, but with a different tool.
Mm-hmm.
Like I use the word analogy. We're all trying to cut the same thing, but with different blades.
Yep.
And it's interesting. I'd love to get your thoughts on like what were some challenges for you as you transitioned from kind of master of none type of work, working in a small company to being in IT consulting or technology consulting to marketing and now into managing product. Like how has that flow been for you and how has your brain had to think in different ways?
Well, I would say that if you get a chance to work for a small company and become a jack of all trades, then this is a great skill to start with. I would not advise people as they come out of university to try to join a big company like Microsoft or Amazon because you're going to be very focused on one thing only.
Yeah.
And then that is really not what you want to do because early on in your career, you might decide that, you know what, you actually want to be playing with networking stacks, right? You might actually enjoy setting up server stacks and servers for your enterprise or VMs these days because no one really owns hardware apart from a few companies. Yeah. So given the chance, go and do it. Getting mentors and the right people in the industry and actually diverse mentors as well, as in not just somebody that does the exact same thing as you, but maybe something similar, or maybe someone in marketing, or maybe someone in sales to help you build this diverse skill is also very important. Consultancy was probably the best gig of my life, considering that I was able to work for 3 or 6 months with a specific company, take the good things that they were doing and then transfer them to the next job. Also learn about the bad things that they were doing, bad practices, and then try not to repeat them or get this kind of early signs like this is a red flag. I've seen this before in another company. I really don't want to work in this field or this role because I know I'm going to get the exact same challenges and issues. So consultancy is great for building skill very, very quickly. But it requires you to be adaptable and being able to jump into new challenges without really fearing failure. And then finally, I have to say that joining Microsoft was a dream come true for me. Yeah. And I did join in the field. So I was actually working with customers for my first role where I was trying to help them. So it was a consultancy for a day kind of thing. That's how I would describe a PFE role, where you go to a customer, you help them solve a problem, and then you move on to the next challenge. It can be totally different products. It can be storage one day, it can be security the next day, it can be coding the third day. So it was great for me, but I wanted a little bit more of a challenge. So I moved to marketing. And the transition was interesting because I went from a very technical hands-on role to actually being totally hands-off and behind the scenes and trying to coordinate larger efforts through marketing, because marketing's role is to reach as many people as possible and help the funnel towards a call to action, whether that's go and download this thing or go and try our new SDK or go and do something else. Sure. Yeah. It was fun to see how marketing works, and especially at Microsoft, we have our own way of doing marketing. And therefore, as I progress through different roles, I always can relate back and reference back my experiences from marketing, because now I have to work with marketing in a different capacity. And because I know how they work, I know their SLAs, I know their processes, I know what they can do and what they cannot do if I ask them for things. And therefore, it was a very valuable, albeit a short experience of a year and a half. And now in program management, my role is a little bit weird because even though I'm a program manager, I'm also developer relationships. So I'm a developer, advocate, program manager. So it's a mouthful. But my role is to create programs that help advocacy be successful. So I'm an advocate, but I also create programs that help the advocacy team be more successful. So it does both things. Rather than being just an advocate, I can also pitch and coordinate projects that I don't really deliver myself. Somebody else will deliver for us. Again, you need to find what you're passionate about. I was talking yesterday with a friend who's in a similar boat, and we're talking about career progression and what we want to do, and whether being an IC is something that we want to pursue for the future, whether moving into management is something that we want to do. And I was like, you know what? I'm not ready to be a manager because As a manager, you let go of many things that you control as an IC. As an IC, my performance is directly related to what I deliver and how I do
Yep.
things. And I can also jump into doing fun stuff and building whatever. As a manager, your success is usually directly correlated with the people that you manage.
Yep.
So if you have a good team, you're awesome because there's not many things that you need to do as a manager for them to be successful. But there are cases where your team might have struggles and challenges, and there might be people that are not performing as well, and that has a direct reflection to you, even though it's not you doing like
Yep.
I cannot do somebody else's work for them to be successful. Whereas right now, as an IC, I see myself as like if I work hard and I deliver this, then I know that this directly translates to my performance. But these are all decisions that people have to make at
Yeah.
some point to decide how they want to move. Maybe in 2 years' time, I'm like, you know what? Screw that. I don't want to touch code anymore. I want to manage people. So
Yeah.
never say never.
Yeah, being an individual contributor or an IC, right, is interesting because like your focus is very narrow,
Yeah.
right? Like, what have I done? What to quote Microsoft's like performance manager, like, what have I done to help others? What have others done to help me? And what have I done by myself, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like that approach. And when you start managing people, you run down this path of like, okay, how have my people done all those things?
Yes.
And if you manage managers, it's even like more like inception. But I think your point is very spot on. Is like you move farther away from, I guess, the problems that your team is trying to solve, and you're trying to solve problems for your team.
Yes.
And that's like, even though the exact same words are used, like the switching and the subtlety of phrases is very important. Because if you're a people manager, your job is your people.
Yeah.
Whether you manage 20 people or you manage one, like your job is your people.
Yeah.
And I've had this similar internal conversations like, do I want to manage people? Do I not want to manage people? And I go back and forth. I get a bit impatient with just the work that I do. I couldn't imagine. My goal is I would never want to be a micromanager, but I feel like I feel like I would probably micromanage, and that's not cool.
Well,
Especially
this is
knowing that I'm
probably
very
because
against it.
that's the only
Yeah.
way to feel that you're in control of, like as an IC,
Yeah.
you micromanage yourself all the time because you're like, I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to do this. I have 3 meetings and then I have to write some code and I have to deliver whatever. So you
Yeah.
tend to micromanage yourself, but as a manager, you cannot. You'd be totally hated if you end up micromanaging people. But I feel that people that micromanage other people are the ones that try to stay in control of their performance because, like, let's say you were managing me, right? Your
Yep.
responsibility is me. Now I have to go and deliver some deliverables, whatever it is. We agree on that. I can work on my own time. I can work on my own schedule, and
Yep.
hopefully I will deliver them on time. You can't do anything about that
No.
until the deliverable date. However, if you were to be a micromanager, you're like, okay, what did you do today? What are you going to do tomorrow? How far are you in the project? And that creates a little bit of a tension. Usually for people that, like me, I work on my own time and schedule, so I might do them on a Sunday night and have them ready for
Yeah.
you on Monday. But on Friday, you're gonna come and ask me, "Are you ready for Monday?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not ready." And then
Nope. But I will be on Monday.
that creates pressure for
Yeah.
you. That creates pressure for me. Right now, I have to say that I have to give kudos to my manager because he's probably one of the best managers I had. It gives you enough leeway to go and do what you need to do, and he expects the deliverables to be there. But never in the 2 years that we've been working together has he asked me where we are with a specific project. In fact, he doesn't even want to hear about where we are with the project until it's time to deliver that. And because he knows that I'm delivering, he doesn't really care how I do it.
Yeah, that's a trust thing too, right?
It is.
Like you have to trust that your people can just deliver. We're all adults. We're all getting paid more than more than the non-technical person is being paid to be able to do these things. And if you're able to successfully manage your work or not, because let's be fair, if you don't manage your work very well, you'll be told you're not managing your work very well. And eventually, if these conversations happen too much, you might have different problems.
Yeah.
Than just managing your work.
Yeah.
And like that's always top of mind for a lot of people. And I know people like, everybody has that example of like, oh, I know people that really don't do anything, but they're fine and they're able to. But I think at the end of the day, if you take pride in the work that you do, you're not going to enjoy those conversations of, oh, you're not meeting expectations or, oh, you're not whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting. You mentioned something that I think that's very, at least for me, I've very top of mind or very interesting. Like you mentioned, developer advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're not a developer advocate by title or by trade, like your responsibility is very much in advocating for the things that you are chartered with.
Yep.
I used to say this all the time in a lot of other jobs that I've had where I'm just a developer advocate, just as my title isn't that.
Yeah.
Like when I worked in consulting, it's like, oh, I'm a developer advocate, like because my job is to get you to enjoy working with this technology.
Yes.
And in marketing, like if you're in technical marketing, like I am, like I'm a developer advocate, but my goal is to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that the marketing assets and the marketing content that we're building is genuine to developers.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate the work that you do, because you're trying to make some of these, I guess you could say, difficult concepts to one out of interest or two out of time, like hard to absorb being security, and making them developer focused or developer friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to kind of get your thoughts, because you mentioned earlier security is not the thing that's first thought about. It's
Nope.
usually the thing that's thought about after something bad happens
Yes.
and after the project has already been done and there's no longer any budget for the project.
Mm-hmm.
But you still need to talk to developers in a way that's like, these are things you need to be thinking of when you first start building your applications,
Yeah.
or else that's what the future looks like.
Exactly.
So how do you kind of build content, or how do you build ideas around like making these things exciting for developers when our brains have been wired that these things are not exciting?
How do I inspire people through? I would say through the fear of God. Like it doesn't take too much of a search or effort to find a number of examples out there where people didn't really think about security in the right way, and then they ended up making the news for their own reasons. And we know companies across every part of the industry, like whether you're a bank, whether you're Domino's delivering pizzas, whether you're creating, like Adobe, and all these are partners of Microsoft. So technically, I mean, these are all news. Sony out there, all these companies, Facebook, all these
Yep.
companies have made the.
Uh-oh, looks like Christos, looks like we lost him. Hopefully we'll get him back in a second. Let me figure out what's going on here. One moment, folks. Are you still there, sir? Yeah, hold on. Hold on 1 second. Let's get you up and running. All right. Dun, 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 dun. You there, sir? Oh, we are having a failure. I don't know what's going on. All right. All right, let's try something else. I can see you now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep. I can hear you. Yeah.
You
Say
can't
something
hear me.
again. I can
One,
hear
two,
you.
three. Okay,
I
good.
can hear you. Yeah. Cool. So I think we're fine. We're back.
I think as soon as I started calling names, the
Uh-oh.
internet is like, I am upset with you. I'm dropping you.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think don't mention company names. I can't afford it. I can't afford the product placement. Um,
companies out there screw up their software. How about that?
yeah.
It's not just software. It's actually security is a very challenging problem because it's not just one thing that you need to look after. You start with architecture, then you have infrastructure, then you have DevOps, then you have dev, and then you have the human element. Like everything can be secure, and then suddenly, you know, somebody in your company gets social engineered into, you know, do, giving information that shouldn't be given,
Yeah.
and they become the Trojan horse into your infrastructure. So there are a lot of different components into making a solution secure. And this is always a challenge. Where do you start and when do you finish? Like you can have a super secure code base running on insecure infrastructure.
Yeah.
Is it the codes or the developers' fault, or is it the engineers' fault that set up the infrastructure, or is it the hosting company that got hacked and then allowed everyone to get access to? So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and again, every solution is different. Every single person writes code in different ways, unless you let Copilot write the code for you, at which point you don't really have to worry about inconsistencies. But
Nope.
assuming that everybody writes their own code, they have their own style. It's very hard to have a tool that does security for you because it's not a hardware issue; it's a principle issue. So every single developer out there should at least be aware of certain security principles that they need to apply as they do the code. Enterprises need to employ better practices around bringing security teams a lot sooner into the development process, even as part of your agile planning, right? How do you think about what you're going to be building in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever your sprint is, and how is that going to affect your security?
Yeah.
Is your security team looking into your Git commits? Is there any tool or automation that looks into your Git commits and Git merges and pull requests to make sure that you're not embedding code that could be malicious? Like your developer can be the most insecure link in your chain. For
Yes.
example,
This is
if
very
I
true.
were to if I wanted to write something malicious, like let's say our company is taking payment from customers and we ship them some fantastic product. Now, I want to make some extra money. What I can do is I can write a routine in the code that actually looks into the online payment and takes 5 cents for every payment, or I harvest the credit card credential, the credit card information as it goes through and sends it into some server. That piece of code can be like 10 lines of code or maybe
Yeah.
less, and it can be embedded in the code. It doesn't really break anything. The code still runs, it passes all the unit tests, but if nobody looks at my code, if there's no review from security or other engineers there, then that can go and run in production and nobody will figure it out. That can be an insider job. Now, and an external hacker can also access the source code and embed that piece of code. So technically, they're not breaking, they're not stealing anything, they're not taking your IP. They're using your IP to get access to other
Yep.
resources. So it's like you can see it can be everywhere and anywhere. So it's always scary. And there are ways, obviously, to address them. Microsoft has done a fantastic job in creating this well-architected framework where we talk about security principles there as well. What do you need to look for? And then if you're running on a cloud environment, then how can you leverage your cloud solution to protect you? And then we also teach developers on how to protect their users' data, the users' identities, how to securely access resources, and no matter where they are or how they're running. And my job, in effect, becomes a more of an educational kind of a role where
Yeah.
I try to educate people about all the dangers out there and then point them the right direction to help them do things. And then if they have a specific question, then always willing to help out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the fear of God, right? Like it's pretty solid. Like everybody, like regardless of what their beliefs is, like they understand fear of God being a thing. Like
Yeah.
the fear of the demo gods, fear of the security gods, what have you. There's another area of your focus too that I think is also very interesting. That's it's paired always with security, but it's not specifically security, and that's identity, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the idea is like because identity and security, yes, they have some relation, but they're very much different. Like the
Mm-hmm.
goals of identity are very different than the goals of security. And I'd love to get your thoughts on like first off, maybe just identify like what identity is, at least to
Sure.
you, and
Yeah.
like what it means specifically for developers.
Yeah. Unless you are creating a very static marketing page that only displays some information, let's say about a product, the likelihood is that you're building a solution somewhere that needs to know who the user is. Like
Yeah.
if you are signing into a forum to talk to your friends about World of Warcraft or Call of Duty, if you are going to buy something from your favorite supermarket, all these tools need to know who you are so they can first personalize your experience. Secondly, they need to know what you can do once you're in. Like if you're an admin, then you can do a lot more things in the solution rather than just being a simple customer. And then finally, you can use that information to customize the data that you store and how you store them. So
Yeah.
identity is what allows us to identify you. And we have multiple identities. You probably have a million online accounts that you've created
Yep.
throughout the years as you're shopping and accessing stuff around. I
Yeah.
know that's a problem. And then, we're getting better at this. We're getting better at helping people not have so many identities anymore out there, because
Yep.
without a password manager, or if I ever lose my password manager tool, I'll be screwed for life, because I have
Yeah.
almost 800 different accounts there. And please do use a password manager if you are using the web. And identity, in effect, tells us who you are. In the real world, that can be your passport or your driver's license. You go somewhere, you present your driver's license. It's issued by an authority that everybody recognizes. The DVLA is there for everyone. You cannot ignore that. A passport from your country is also an authority that you can do and present, and everybody understands passports. So a digital identity, in the same way, is something that is issued to you by a reputable identity provider, usually, and allows the consumer of that identity to personalize the experience.
Yeah, I think we're all very guilty of having way too many accounts, or in my case, very guilty of having my Google identity shared across every single company that exists, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I love to get your thoughts on that specifically, because you have like these. I see that there's two options really
Mm-hmm.
going down in your identity journey. One, you can have your own identity provider, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically like I store some version of username and passwords
Yeah,
internally to my system. Obviously, I'm protecting for PII, personal identifiable information. I'm salting the passwords so they're not readable. Like I'm doing all the things that I should do. Or my option is just okay. I allow people with all these different login types to be able to use my system, and
sure.
because I trust these providers.
Yeah.
From your opinion, what are the pros and cons of those? Because I think for a lot of people, especially folks that sign up for a lot of online systems, like there's a huge benefit to just clicking the sign in with Twitter, the sign in with Google.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
then you run into the situation where your information is shared from Google to all these other instances, right? Like, what are your thoughts on like how we can find a balance?
So it's probably the other way around. So let's start first with you rolling your own identity provider or your own identity system. That's what most companies have done out there for a very long time. The challenge there is that it doesn't scale well, and unless you have a very rigid and a very good team in creating an identity system, then the likelihood is that that system is susceptible to attacks.
Sure.
Either the data in rest, either the data in transit, or somebody being able to hack your solution, because there's so many different components in an identity system. Like you have your sign in, perfect. Then you have the sign up. Then you have
Yep.
emails that go back and forth. Then you have two-factor authentication. Then you have some way to confirm that whatever is presented to you is valid. Then you have all the data storage, and then suddenly you end up with 20 different databases with 20 different user accounts that are not managed centrally, and you're
Lots
screwed
of text
because
boxes you can write SQL queries in.
yeah, and then somebody leaves the company, and you forgot to remove them from this admin portal that
Yep.
was there, and nobody remembered about that. So that's the one challenge. Please do not roll your own identities if you can do. Then you can rely on identity provider with OAuth 2. So you said Google. So I go to a website and they present me with an option to sign in with my Google account. This is great. The fear there is that if Google is down for whatever reason, and then it takes with you all access to other sites. Facebook was down a couple of months ago, and then every website that had a Facebook sign-in or sign-in with Facebook could not be accessed if you were trying to
Yep.
use that because Facebook was down. So that's the other dependency you take there. The other fear with that is that Facebook now knows every single website I've signed into. Like
Mm-hmm.
they know my habits. Oh, I buy shoes
Yep.
from Nike. Oh, they know. So Facebook will now start serving me ads for Nike, or maybe Adidas will pay more to present me with shoes because they know that I buy trainers.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. Who owns the data? There's a third option which is new to identity, and it's going to probably take identity by storm, and that is identity on steroids or blockchain or decentralized identity,
Sure.
where the user owns their identity. Like I
Mm-hmm.
will present you with a verifiable credential where I want to sign in. You will use the identity provider to verify that credential, but I own that credential. If I ever want to to remove that information from your website, I can do it on a whim because I own my identity. Any other system right now or up until today, it's actually the identity belongs to you. If you have a website that people come to buy, the daily shopping stuff. Let's say it's a supermarket. They own that identity, and I have to reach out to them and say, please remove it from your system. I don't want to get ads, or I don't want to shop anymore. And then you have to hope on their goodwill. Whereas
Sure.
with decentralized identity, the power goes back to the user. So I own my identity. You get an identifier that you can use to, like a GUID or whatever, that you can use to go back to the identity issuer and say, is this person who they claim they are? And then because there's this trust, I own my identity. You can get the information you need, but you never get access to my personal information. And I become the owner of that. Therefore, I can take my verifiable credentials and make them more reusable and more transferable. And the power goes back to the user. And you also, as a developer or as a company, don't have to worry about how you're going to store that information or how you're going to implement that process, because the onus falls into the identity provider. And that's exciting. That has me really
Yeah.
excited.
It's also so it's very interesting. I watched a keynote at a conference a few years
Mm-hmm.
ago, and the speaker was talking about it wasn't just identity, but it was decentralized like personas. So like this idea of like I I let other companies
Mm-hmm.
like for instance like a hospital or a
Yep.
bank. I let
Yep.
them have access to my persona and get data really specific to what their needs are from me. But it's
Yes.
always they come directly to me to get this information. I don't
Exactly.
sign up for their thing. But he was talking about like how this in 5 years, 10 years, like this is going to be the de facto thing because data privacy is so important, and it doesn't make
Yep.
sense for a hospital to know everything about you
Mm-hmm.
unless you're a patient
Yep.
and they need that information.
Correct.
Especially like after you leave a hospital. Like
Mm-hmm.
why do my records need to stay at this hospital forever?
Yep.
I should have possession of those, and I should be the single source of truth for all information related to me.
Exactly.
And I like you're talking about from an identity standpoint, because I think that there is a problem. Every couple of months you see a big data breach happening,
Oh
and it's
yeah.
not because sure, social engineering happens that people get their identity stolen all the time, and that's like a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But what's more likely is some company gets breached and
Yep.
20 million passwords get leaked or 20
Mm-hmm.
million email addresses get leaked, because the scale of that is so much more. And I think that's really interesting about this whole idea of decentralized identity. Are there currently movements in that space, or is it just all theoretical at this point?
No, we actually have a solid API. And in fact, if you want to learn more, next month we'll have a whole set of activities that go around what is decentralized identity, why you should care about it, and how to implement it. But we currently have a REST API that is fully supported and backed by Azure Active Directory, and you can go and create a solution that benefits from decentralized identity. That API, because it's a REST API, you can use whichever language you want as well, so it's not SDK bound. And it literally is like 4 different calls that you need to do with 4 different payloads to issue and verify credentials. So you as Nike can issue a verifiable credential to me, then I own that credential. And every time I come to you, I just verify that credential. So I don't have to sign in again. It's just, I'm scanning it, I'm using my authenticator app. It says, do you want to allow this company to use your credential? I say yes. And then at that point, you as Nike gets back the data that you need to create a personalized experience, and you know who I am. And that's the beauty of that. It's all available out today to date for you, and we are working with customers to start creating more solid scenarios about how people can benefit from that. Because it's early days, right? People don't really understand this kind
Yeah.
of shift of me. I don't own the customer data. How am I going to be able to sell them shoes or send them a marketing email to say, yeah, we have an offer of 30% off. So now it's this kind of the power goes back to the user. It's funny how we say that, but power to the user.
Yeah.
And it's great because companies now will have to adjust in new reality, but at the same time, users will have a lot more control of where their data is used and how it's used.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate a little bit
Sure.
here, because even though you're talking about all these different external sources coming directly to you, they're going
Mm-hmm.
to one place still. and
True.
that place isn't you. It's
Yeah.
an it's a platform that you have given rights to your persona,
Correct.
right? Which I think is
Yeah.
very interesting because you're still I see it like first. Let me say this is extremely more valuable or beneficial
Hmm.
from a privacy perspective than the alternative.
Yep.
However, now you have a single source of truth about you that is not you. You've just given rights to that platform.
True. True.
So, and it's interesting to me that I would be interested in knowing in 5 years, like
Hmm.
if we run into a situation where people carry like little fobs on their person at all times,
Yep.
right? And like, you go somewhere and your fob gets scanned and that's whatever, right? Um, or obviously something probably more sophisticated than a fob in 10 years, but beside the point, maybe an embedded RFID chip or something. But I think in general, there's something to say about you're still dependent on a vendor,
Yep.
right?
True.
Because Isaac doesn't scale.
Yes.
Like if Isaac got an email from or a phone call from every single person who wants Isaac's
Hmm.
information, Isaac
Yep.
would have no time to do anything.
Correct.
But it's all very interesting, and I definitely it seems to me substantially more beneficial than having just artifacts of your persona or your identity just littered around the internet, right?
That is correct. Yeah. So there's definitely benefit in centralizing that experience. I agree that you have to still have to rely to a vendor to provide that, whether that's
Yeah,
Microsoft, Google, Amazon, or whichever other players out there in terms of providing identities and implementing a decentralized kind of way to manage identities. It doesn't matter. What comes down to is, you're right. Do I trust Microsoft with my data?
yeah,
Right. And also, I think it's still valuable because you have one vendor or maybe a couple of vendors that implement that in comparison to 1,000 vendors that you have to rely on
yes,
for
yes,
storing your data. And then the nice thing is that both you and the end um, service have to both have an implicit trust to that vendor to issue
yeah,
and verify the credentials. So it's a business decision that you have to make as a business owner to say, I want to work with Microsoft to manage these identities and provide me the information I need. And me as a consumer, I say, well, I trust Microsoft or X company to manage my data because they have a proven track that they don't really use the data to do marketing or resell them or whatever. And I want to use that because it gives me control on who's doing that. Now you're right. I mean, um, there's also possibility for abuse here, depending on who you're using.
yeah.
But then it comes down to who you trust with your data. And unfortunately, right now, everyone is trusting everyone. Like when I go
No,
to
yeah. Well,
whatever
that's the thing.
website, and I hope for the best, and then you suddenly see like people can do clever things like create aliases for every email that they do and create unique emails, and suddenly they
Yep,
go like, oh, I shopped at that shop with that email, and suddenly I'm getting marketing emails or
yep,
spam from some random company, so I can't trust them anymore because they're selling
yeah.
my data. But there's nothing I can do to revoke that credential. Once it's out there, it's out there. Whereas
No,
with verifiable credentials, you say no more trust, delete that credential,
yep.
no one can use it, it's done. So there's this, yeah.
Do you know what would be the best way for me to build trust with a company that has my data?
Go on.
If they paid me. Because I've said this as a joke a few times that if Google wants to make money off of me, I'm okay with that because I agreed to their license agreements that yes, we might use your data, but I want a little taste.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want a little bit of taste of that money because I know it exists.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to a friend of mine who's in practical sciences. He's a marine biologist, and we were talking about he's like, I don't understand how all these companies make money. And I'm like, okay, let me tell you how they make money. And I literally went down the chain of it's just not Google making money. It's about 4,500 other companies that Google
Yes.
interfaces with that makes the money.
Yep.
Even though it's fractions of a penny every single time, at scale, it's millions of dollars.
Yes.
And he was like, well, why doesn't the consumer get any of that money? And I said, that's a great question. Why doesn't the consumer get any of that money?
Because the
And
consumer is the end product, my friend.
well, I mean, there's a thing to say about if you're not buying anything, you're the product.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and but I would love to see something come out where it's like maybe there's a buy-in program, Like maybe it's like, okay, you understand that Google or Microsoft or Amazon or Facebook or whatever company has all of your information, and
Yep.
you're okay with that. But do you want to sign up for oh, you're going to get lots of spam service and you get paid for that? Because that's something that I may be interested in.
Yeah.
Like, because I already know my data's flowing everywhere. If I can make some money off, and I know this is impossible because there's no reason for Google to give me money because
Sure.
they're already doing it.
Yep.
But I wonder how much goodwill it builds if there's an opportunity for consumers. And maybe I'm just preaching to people who don't really who agree with me, but the broader audience isn't aware of this stuff. But I'm curious of like, there has to be a better way than just aggregating all customer data, right? And you just trusting said company.
Yeah. Like I would rather have this kind of an opt-in option, say never use my data
Yes.
and I don't get a penny, or I opt in and I get a cut of, if my data is used and they make money out of that, then I take a 0.005%, whatever
Yeah.
that is. Um, yeah, I can see that being something that they could whip together, but then again, they will lose the cut for their own money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
exactly. No, and I know from a business perspective, it doesn't make a ton of sense.
hmm
But I'm just curious of this idea of like, there definitely is something to say about building goodwill with your customer base.
Yep,
And there's no better way of building goodwill than giving somebody money.
true.
But I do think that like all the things you're talking about, you know, delittering your persona across the internet is very, very important.
hmm
And, I'll be honest, there's a lot of companies that are in this decentralized space that you're speaking of that I trust or trust enough to store all of my personal information in.
Yep.
Because the alternative, like you mentioned, is not enjoyable at all.
No. Yeah.
One, because there's a whole industry that's been created called password management
hmm
that solely exists because of this problem. If this
Yep.
problem is fixed, there's no longer a password management industry, which
Correct.
would be interesting.
Well, we have passwordless now with Microsoft, right? If you're using a Microsoft account, it's
Sure.
passwordless. You
Yes.
still have a password somewhere, but in most cases, you can use, two-factor authentication, FIDO
Yep.
keys, or passwordless altogether to allow you to not use your password anymore, which is great.
Yeah.
FIDO keys are going down the right path where we have non-hackable passwords because you rely now on hardware keys to do that. But it's a hardware key. If you lose the key, then you're screwed. You
Yep.
don't want that to rely on that.
That's
You're
been a
right.
problem with RSA
There's a whole
keys for
industry.
10 years, right?
There's a whole industry that tries to solve
Yeah.
the problem of us having to use passwords. And it's a 30-year-old, 40-year-old problem now that we're still
Yep.
haven't found a good solution to.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it goes back to some of the things we talked about a bit earlier, right? Where these are things that are not thought about
Yes.
until terrible things happen.
Correct.
And I think the goal of, the brave folks out in the world like you is like trying to educate audiences around, hey, did you know that these things could be challenging? Did you know that I didn't know if you were aware of this, but your company probably does not want to be on the just got breached or have I been pwned or like
Yeah.
your hacking service aggregator of choice, right? Like you want to be known as a company that's safe and secure. And
Correct.
it's a challenge. Like there's whole
Yep.
teams of companies building these things. You're a part of it, right?
Yeah. And we're trying to educate one developer at a time. So hopefully, we're helping natives to get a little bit more secure one day at a time.
Yeah. And and with that, we're at the top of the hour. And Christos, I thank you so much for hopping on and having the conversation with me. It's always great to talk with friends, especially about things as exciting as security and identity. But I think you
Yeah.
did a great job of making it very exciting, right?
I'm trying to. I don't know. I don't know if I make it exciting or I bore people, but at least I'm trying to, um, put some fun into security and educate people.
Yeah. Awesome. And so as we part, I like to ask my guest, if you can think of tech or open source or the community around it in one word, what would that word mean to you?
You mean around security or around
Just in
everything?
general. In general.
You want a specific project or thoughts about open source and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
it's just one word to think about. Like, what do you think of when you think about technology and the work that you do and open source? Like, what does that word like? What comes to mind? Like some good examples are partnership or community or collaboration or fear or joy. Like people have given me all sorts of different answers.
I would say innovation. Like we
Innovation.
stand on the shoulders of giants, right? I
Yep.
wouldn't be here today if it wasn't all these amazing people creating libraries and writing software that helps make our lives a lot easier. I
Yep.
never had to think about bubble sorts or linked lists or whatever because somebody else has
Yes.
done the implementation for us. So I would
Yeah.
say our industry relies heavily on open source. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect world. We have our challenges, but I do believe that as a whole, we've done some amazing innovations by sharing code and helping people be better at their jobs. So open source for the
Innovation's
win.
great. I think
Yeah.
that's awesome. So, as we part, thank you again, Christos, for hopping on, saying hello. Do you have any parting words?
I would say stay safe, everyone. Enjoy the holidays if you're celebrating. Merry Christmas to everyone and Happy New Year. I'll see you all in the new year because today is my last day of work.
Great. Well, I hope you're enjoying it. So, thanks everybody for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a safe holiday. And we'll see you next time on Coffee and Open Source. Take care.